I never thought silence could weigh more than a name not spoken. There was soil under my nails when the phone rang. I wiped one hand on the side of my faded gardening shirt, the kind Reed used to say made me look comfortably invisible. I remember that phrase more than I should. His voice on the line carried that particular tone, breezy, efficient, trying to sound casual, but never quite landing. He said he had just been promoted, senior vice president. Something about operations. He skimmed over the details. "We're doing a small thing tonight," he said. "Just close family." Julia booked the Ridge. The Ridge. Linen napkins, water poured from glass bottles, steak cut by waiters in gloves. I'd been there once years ago, anniversary dinner. The hostess had called me Mrs. Calderon like it meant something. I asked what I should wear. Just something low quiet. Something to fit in. There was a pause, the kind that leaves fingerprints on your ribs. "Actually, Mom, this one's really just intimate, you know? Like Julia invited her folks, her sister, the girls, and us. It's just the closer circle." I pressed my fingers into the base of my palm. "Will Lily be there?" "Yeah, of course. And Ethan, too. They're both excited." He said it like I wasn't the one who used to pack their lunchboxes when Julia had early flights. Like I hadn't taught Ethan to tie his shoelaces because Reed didn't have the patience. He cleared his throat again. I could hear papers being shuffled. Then came the second part. The part wrapped in thin politeness. "Listen, I wouldn't ask, but I sort of maxed the corporate card in Seattle. The hotel billed twice. Would it be okay to use your platinum just for tonight? I'll bring it back first thing in the morning." The breeze moved the chimes outside. Reed didn't wait for an answer. "Not really. Just need it by 5. I'll swing by before the reservation." I said that was fine. My voice didn't wobble. It never does when it shouldn't. He thanked me and hung up. Not once did he say my name. At 4:56 he pulled up. Still in work clothes. He didn't come inside. Just leaned on the doorframe, glancing at his phone thumb hovering. He looked past me when I opened the door. "Hey, thanks again. You're saving me." I handed him the card, the one with the worn corner from years in my purse. I noticed a faint smudge of dirt on my knuckle. "I baked the lemon loaf Lily likes," I said, though I hadn't meant to. "Oh," he said. "I think Julia ordered the chocolate kind. But thanks." He pocketed the card without looking, then added, "We'll drop it back tomorrow." He didn't offer a time. I didn't ask for one. The door closed more quietly than it needed to. That house has good hinges. Thomas always said a quiet door reflects a steady home. I returned to the garden, pulled weeds, trimmed back the peonies that had bloomed too early. There was a coffee stain on the cuff of my sleeve, a ring faint but stubborn. I rinsed my hands at the basin outside. The dirt wouldn't lift from the creases. Water pooled in the curve of my wedding band, still on, though the man who gave it to me left 12 springs ago. At 7:18, I sat in the kitchen with the light off. The silence wasn't lonely, just full. My phone lit up. A photo posted by Julia, her mother holding Lily on her lap. Ethan laughing beside his uncle. Reed standing behind them, one hand resting on Julia's shoulder. His tie loose, his smile polite. The caption read, "Grateful to celebrate with the ones who matter most." I studied the image like I didn't know the people inside it. No seat at the table, no empty chair with my name, just air where a presence should have been. Another photo followed. The cake. Glossy frosting. Piped gold letters. "To the man who built everything." I ran my finger along the screen, tracing the letters. I thought of the lunchboxes, the early mornings, the piano recitals, the hospital forms, the mortgage signatures, the night Reed had chickenpox and only fell asleep wrapped in my sweater. I didn't feel like arguing with memory. I went to the drawer near the oven. pulled out the envelope I hadn't touched since Thomas passed, his handwriting on the front still sharp. Only open when you begin to vanish. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Not yet. I set it on the counter, turned the kettle on, poured water into my chipped ceramic mug. The one with a faint crack that never deepened. Outside, the lights in the garden flicked on by timer. They didn't know I wasn't at the table. They just kept shining. Later, as I rinsed the mug, I looked at my hands. The dirt was gone, but the skin beneath had thinned. Veins visible. A small burn mark near my wrist from a pie dish last Christmas. Ethan had said, "You're like the oven itself, Grandma, always warm." I hadn't heard that tone from him in a while. I left the sink running a moment longer than I needed to. The sound filled the space where words should have been. I wiped the counter, turned off the lights, stood at the window and watched the empty driveway. I didn't say anything aloud. Not to the night, not to the silence. I just stood there and understood close family didn't include me. And that was all. I used to think if I took up less space, they'd find room for me. The check I wrote for Reed's final semester at Northwestern had a smudge in the top corner. I remember because I licked the envelope flap too tightly and had to pry it open again with a letter opener. He never knew that. He only called once after it cleared mid-laundry, his voice mixed with drier hum. I didn't ask for reimbursement. I folded the receipt and kept it between pages of a hymn book in the hall closet. I'm not sure why I chose that spot. Maybe it felt private. When they bought the house on Belmore, they'd already drained Julia's savings and most of Reed's bonus. There were too many zeros missing. I sent a check labeled bridging gift. Julia didn't acknowledge it. At the housewarming, her parents made a toast. She looked at her mother and said, "We couldn't have done this without you." I stood near the hallway mirror holding a tray of deviled eggs no one touched. Thanksgiving always belonged to Julia. I offered twice early on. "The kitchen's too small for all the grandkids," she said not unkindly. "And your oven's vintage." So I brought pies. Always pumpkin, sometimes apple. I sat near the far end of the folding table, where the extra chairs creaked and one leg was uneven. A pine-scented candle sat between me and a half-empty bottle of cider. Julia's father always carved the turkey. Reed rarely looked up during the meal. Once Ethan's birthday fell on a school night. I arrived early with streamers and silver balloons shaped like sevens. Julia met me at the door, wearing that soft smile she uses when something needs correcting. "Oh no, Mom. You rest. We've got everything ready." I stepped back, said, "Of course," and put the balloons by the door. Later, they appeared in the recycling bin, deflated but never unwrapped. Reed once started a weekly Zoom for family check-ins. He sent a calendar invite titled Harmon Calderon Sunday Catch-Up. I logged in 5 minutes early every week. He'd nod when I appeared, then launch into updates about Ethan's swim meets or Julia's consulting contract. Once I mentioned a fall I had in the garden. No one responded. Reed muted me to improve the audio balance. They never forgot to include me in group texts, just never addressed me directly. I'd send a thumbs up. Sometimes Reed used to reply with THX Mom. Lately, not even that. Once at the hospital, when Thomas was still undergoing treatment, Julia visited briefly. She brought store-bought soup and placed it on the bedside table. I thanked her. She smiled thinly. "We all grieve in our own way," she said, though no one had died yet. "Some people hold on too long." That was the only sentence she spoke to me that day. When Thomas passed, Reed spoke at the service. He mentioned how much his father loved jazz, how he used to whistle while washing the car. He taught me to keep moving no matter what he said. I looked down at my hands folded in my lap. I'd written the eulogy. That line wasn't in it. I used to imagine one of them would notice just once that the sweater Julia wore had been mine in the early 90s back when mustard yellow was brave, or that the crystal candy dish they used for peppermints had once sat on my bedroom vanity. I gave it to Julia on a Tuesday. She said, "Oh, this looks vintage, like it didn't carry weight." I'm not invisible. I've told myself that over and over, but I've learned there's a difference between being ignored and being erased. Thomas once told me quietly during one of Julia's parties that he admired how I never made scenes. Grace in retreat, he called it. I remember tracing the rim of my wine glass and nodding, but I didn't retreat. I waited. I adjusted. I excused. When Reed and Julia were struggling that first year, I pretended not to hear them argue when they stayed the night. I turned on the fan in the guest room and slept with the pillow over my head. When Julia forgot my birthday and Reed sent flowers a day late, I put them in the good vase. When Ethan asked why there were no candles, I said, "Some celebrations are quiet." Every time I gave space, I believed it would be returned. Every silence was meant to show patience, not absence. I thought if I didn't complain, didn't insert myself, they'd eventually invite me closer. I thought Reed would say, "We couldn't have done this without you." Or Julia might hand me the carving knife, or ask me to bless the table. But people don't fill gaps just because you leave them open. They build over them. They decorate the vacancy. I no longer remember when I stopped bringing pie. Last spring, Ethan won second place in a countywide poetry contest. I only found out because his school posted a photo. Julia shared it online with the caption, "Talent runs in the Green family." Green. Not Calderon. I didn't comment. I just stared at the photo until the screen dimmed. They don't call me cruel names. They don't shout. They smile. They manage. They thank. But their kindness has an echo. It bounces back hollow. Sometimes I wonder if I disappeared entirely, how many weeks would pass before anyone said my name out loud. I used to think if I took up less space, they'd find room for me. Now, I'm not so sure I want to fit where I was never seen. I've learned that the sharpest emissions don't echo. They just remain. I was folding laundry when my hand brushed the edge of the embroidered cloth. White thread over faded linen tulips, stitched at the corners. I had sent it in a holiday basket last year, wrapped carefully around a jar of fig jam and a cinnamon candle. Julia never mentioned it. I looked for it the next time I visited. It wasn't on their table, or their drawer, or anywhere that felt warm. It ended up back in my drawer under the dish towels. No explanation. No note. Just folded wrong corners misaligned like someone had tried to make it disappear and failed halfway. I ran my fingers over the stitches again. My own handwriting done in thread. Still intact. There was a time I believed small gestures would keep me remembered. At Ethan's high school graduation, I wore the slate blue coat. Reed once told me it made me look like someone you'd trust with a secret. That day, the auditorium buzzed with noise. Balloons floated near the stage. I arrived early, seat ticket in hand. My name wasn't listed on any of the reserved chairs. I stood by the side scanning the rows. Reed and Julia were already seated with her parents, second row from the front. No glance behind. I took the last seat in the back. From there, Ethan looked like a silhouette, his name muffled by speakers and applause. I watched him through the projection screen. Afterward, I stepped outside with the rest of the crowd. Julia turned as she posed for a group photo. Her eyes landed on me for half a breath. "You came," she said, then adjusted Lily's collar and called for her father to get in closer. I didn't join the picture. Later that week, a photo from the event appeared online. So proud of our boy. No caption beyond that. No room for footnotes. I once kept every holiday card they sent. Last December, the envelope was thick, foil-pressed, expensive. The photo showed the four of them in matching coats on a snowbank, the kind of image meant for mantles. To Dad, Julia, Ethan, and Lily from the Calderones. I read it twice. There was no Mom, no Anita. Just a perfect loop of names, tight and self-contained. I didn't throw it away. I trimmed the border with scissors, clipped the top, glued it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pear. I told myself it was just design. Space-saving, but I knew it wasn't. When I was named most inspiring music teacher in the district, the letter came printed on thick parchment, stamped in blue. I was told to invite my family. It wasn't a grand event, just a Thursday evening at the community hall, chairs in rows, coffee in styrofoam cups. Students clapped. I wore a necklace Thomas once bought me from a flea market. I remember polishing it with a cotton napkin before I left. I called Reed 2 days before. He said the week had been full. We'll see what we can do, but no promises. Julia had a client dinner. Ethan had baseball practice. He offered to send the car for me, but I said no. It wasn't far. I waited outside the hall for 15 minutes before going in. No one came. Not even a text. Not even a silence that meant something. They listed my name. A small plaque followed. I accepted it with both hands. Smiled for the community paper's camera. Afterward, I walked home. The plaque sat on the passenger seat, buckled in. It still rests behind a stack of gardening books in the hallway cabinet. I open it sometimes not to read the words, but to see if the print has faded. It hasn't. Paper forgets slower than people do. I used to tell myself that time was to blame. Everyone too busy, too tired, too distracted. I used to believe I just needed to be more patient, more understanding. I believed that silence was maturity, that waiting was a virtue, that if I never asked to be seen, being seen would matter more. I once overheard Julia telling someone at church, Anita's always been more of a background presence. She doesn't need much. The woman nodded. I turned my face slightly so they wouldn't notice I was still in the pew behind them. I went home that day and rearranged the guest room, took out the extra towels I had folded for sleepovers that never happened, donated the puzzles I bought for Lily, the box still sealed. That night I placed my reading glasses on the table and noticed the arm had bent slightly, one side higher than the other. I wore them anyway. I don't expect people to remember everything. Just one thing, one seat, one line of recognition. But I've come to understand that some absences aren't accidents. They're structures, reinforced over years, padded by polite phrases, strengthened by omission. I lifted my teacup and moved toward the sink. The small saucer slipped from beneath my fingers, landed sideways on the tile, and split into 2 even pieces. No sound at first. Just a shape changed. I didn't bend down. I stood still and watched the line where the fracture met the air. And in that quiet moment, I thought, some cracks make no sound, but they're still there. The weight of something borrowed always leaves a mark, even when it's returned. Reed stood under the porch light with sunglasses still on. He shifted from one foot to the other, glancing once at his watch. It'll just be for tonight. We'll get it back to you first thing in the morning. The bill shouldn't go past $500. I held out the card. The edge had worn smooth where my fingers always gripped it. He reached out and took it quickly, like it burned to hold. Lily still likes chocolate, doesn't she? I kept my voice even. I made one last night. He looked toward the car parked at the curb. Thanks, but I think Julia already ordered a cake. Custom. Frosted with edible flowers or something. The keys jangled as he turned to leave. No mention of the restaurant. No address. Just a nod. I watched his shoulders square and careful as he walked back. Julia sat in the passenger seat. She didn't wave. Inside, the chocolate cake sat untouched under a glass dome. I had shaved curls from a dark bar, stirred them into warm batter, tapped the pan gently against the counter the way my mother once taught me. There was no room in the fridge, so I'd set it on the side table in the dining room, under the photo of Reed in his cap and gown. He was smiling in that picture, holding up 2 fingers in a peace sign, his other arm draped around Thomas. Later that night, I sat with the lamp dimmed beside me and opened the app. The charge came in at 9:42 p.m., Fairmont Ridge. Total $1,178.96. Paid with Calderon Premium. No call, no text. I opened my laptop. Julia's name popped up before I finished typing. Family celebrating Jason's promotion, so proud. The caption hung above a series of photos. I clicked slowly. First, the table. Long lined with white roses, gold-rimmed glasses, cloth napkins folded like envelopes. Then the guests, her parents, her sister and brother-in-law, the twins. Even the new baby from her cousin's side. Ethan, with his shirt half-tucked Lily in a bow, too big for her head. One photo showed the menu. The Calderon celebration. I didn't appear in any of them. Not at the end of the table, not off to the side, not even in a blurry corner. The last image stopped me. A cake white fondant, gold lettering across the center. To the man who built everything. I looked at it for a long time, then down at my hands. The same hands that filled college paperwork, that wrote checks, that held Reed's head the night he came home after failing organic chemistry. The same hands that had cut chocolate the night before. I turned off the screen. In the hallway closet behind old scarves and a faded church bulletin, there's a fireproof box. I didn't pull it out often, but I remembered the letter. Black envelope, heavy paper, written in Thomas's slanted print. Open only if our son forgets who you are. He gave it to me the year before the stroke. I didn't ask why. He just looked at me for a while, then tucked it into my palm. You'll know, he'd said. I placed it on the kitchen table next to the credit card and the empty cake plate. I didn't touch it. When Reed was 6, he made a clay pot at school, lumpy and lopsided. He gave it to me for Mother's Day, filled with a handful of dandelions from the backyard. I kept it on the windowsill until the glaze cracked. Julia once asked years later, "Why do you keep that thing? It's not even functional." I remember I didn't answer. I just lifted it and dusted the base. The pot is still there. The crack's wider now. They didn't leave me out by accident. They printed menus, ordered centerpieces, requested a custom cake. They wrote a dedication, chose the words, arranged them in gold icing. I had no seat. But my name paid the bill. The light above the table flickered slightly. I didn't move. My hand rested on the table's edge where the varnish had thinned. Julia liked to say, "It's not personal, it's just logistics." But no one forgets their mother's name when designing a celebration. I once gave Reed a check for the down payment on their first house. He refused it the first time, then folded it quietly into his wallet. That was 12 years ago. The house had been repainted since. Twice. He once said, "I'll always be grateful for how you carried us through the lean years." Now, they raised a glass without me. To the man who built everything. And the woman who kept the lights on, who answered calls at midnight, who stood outside dance recitals with extra gloves in her purse. No mention, no seat. The black envelope remained unopened. Some debts are never owed back, some invitations never arrive. And sometimes a cake is just a reminder that you were always expected to give, never to belong. Some words dry up before they ever reach the throat. The morning followed its usual rhythm. I heated the kettle, rinsed my mug, folded a dish towel that hadn't been used. The steam rose without urgency, leaving a soft film on the kitchen window. The silence in the house was wide, but not heavy. I turned my phone over. A message waited. Thanks, Mom. Dinner was amazing. I'll drop the card off after lunch. No mention of my name not being on the guest list. No mention of who paid. I pressed the edge of the phone against the table until a faint mark appeared on the wood. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the bank. I'd like to close this credit card account. Yes, effective immediately. I'm the sole holder. They asked why. I told them I wouldn't be needing it anymore. I reached for the folder Thomas kept locked in the file cabinet. It was labeled in his careful handwriting, Estate and Legal. I placed it flat on the dining table open to the trust documents, then made a call to Ellery's office. I asked for a copy of the most recent terms and quietly requested a review of the medical proxy. The young assistant paused. Is there a reason you're requesting this now? Mrs. Calderon. I just want clarity, I said. The last call I made was to Diane. She didn't ask much. If someone wanted to quietly test the market value of their home without commitment, just to see I began. Diane's voice softened. You don't have to explain. I'll get you numbers before the week's over. By noon, I had pulled 2 suitcases from the top shelf in the hall closet. I didn't pack them. I just let them sit near the door. One still had a tag from Ethan's wedding 3 years ago. They'd forgotten to send a thank you card. I remembered folding one of the table runners after everyone had left. Julia had left it damp. The front gate creaked. I didn't check the window. I heard the car engine running and footsteps that didn't hurry. Reed's knock was light, like he didn't want to wake someone. I opened the door. He held out the credit card between 2 fingers, almost like an afterthought. I was going to drop this later, but I've got a call coming up. Come in for a moment, I said, stepping aside. He hesitated, then entered. His eyes scanned the hallway, landing on the living room window. The sign in the yard wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. You're selling, I'm thinking about it. Since when? Since someone forgot to mention I wasn't invited. His mouth moved slightly, but nothing formed for a second. Then Julia said it was just going to be her family. She planned it. I didn't think. You didn't think. I poured tea into 2 mismatched cups. One had a crack sealed with clear glue. The other still bore a faint lipstick mark that never washed out. I handed him the latter. Might have been nice to get a heads up, he said, taking the cup. About the sale, about anything. I looked at him. You didn't think I'd notice? It's not that serious. It was just a dinner. The receipt had my name. He shifted in the chair. You're overreacting. I stirred my tea, once left the spoon on the saucer. Mom, come on, don't do this. It's not fair. Fairness wasn't in the invitation. He leaned forward. You're just going to shut us out. I'm stepping away from a place that already shut me out. His grip tightened on the cup. I noticed a small blister on his index finger he still fiddled with hot pans without using mitts. You're acting like none of it meant anything. Did it? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I waited. I'll talk to Julia, he muttered. That won't be necessary. You can't just go quiet on us. I folded the napkin on my lap, slowly pressing the corner with my thumb. I did speak, I said. No one heard. He stood, his voice barely held together. You're making this into something it's not. I walked him to the door, didn't reach for a hug. Take care, Reed. He stood on the porch for a moment, blinking against the sun. Are you doing this to get back at us? I looked down at the floorboards, the spot where Thomas once dropped a potted fern. The wood was still darker there. I'm not getting back at anyone. He hesitated again. So you're just done. I'm finished waiting. When the door shut behind him, I didn't move right away. The ticking of the kitchen clock filled the house again. I picked up the teacup he'd left behind, still half full, still warm. I emptied it, rinsed it, and placed it back on the shelf without drying. I never realized how quiet a room could feel when the silence belonged to me. The mug I brought from the old house had a faded sunflower near the rim, a small chip at the handle, the kind you only notice when your finger brushes it. I ran my thumb over it as the tea cooled beside me, unsure whether I liked that it hadn't broken in the move. The house I rented sat just off the lake road, one story, with a slanted roof and windows that creaked when opened. It didn't smell like anything yet. No one knew I was there. Not Reed, not Julia, not even Ethan. I hadn't told Diane I'd signed the lease. Just asked her to forward anything urgent to the P.O. box. It wasn't hiding, it just didn't require explanation. I unpacked slowly. 3 boxes total. 1 held kitchenware. Another had old sheet music from when Thomas still played piano every Sunday morning. The last contained only things I hadn't been able to throw away: a greeting card from Ethan's 6th birthday party with a misspelled grandma, a pressed maple leaf I once found in Vermont, and the sealed envelope from Thomas. That went into the top drawer of the side table next to the armchair. That night, I lit 1 candle and let a Chopin sonata play from a small speaker. The music filled the corners in a way conversation hadn't in years. I listened without needing to reply, the way Thomas used to let me lean my head on his shoulder during the slow movements. No questions asked. The neighbor on the left, an older woman in thick glasses and gray slippers, left a potted lavender plant on my porch. No note. No knock. Just the plant still damp from watering. I didn't return it. At the grocery store the next morning, I passed by the bakery section twice before pausing in front of the mini chocolate cakes. Reed never liked them. Julia said they were too processed. I placed one into the cart without looking at the price tag. At checkout, I realized I hadn't used a card without someone else's name on it in over a decade. "Is this all, ma'am?" the clerk asked. Her tone was neutral, but her hands moved with the urgency of someone waiting for shift change. I nodded. It wasn't much, but it was mine. When I opened the small linen closet in the hallway, I noticed that I had brought too many towels. Old ones. Mostly frayed. There was a navy blue set Thomas used when he came home early from work and didn't want to wake me. I folded them and tucked them neatly on the bottom shelf. The day passed quietly. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't check messages. My phone rang once around noon. It was from a number that used to be familiar, but now showed only the word wireless caller. I let it ring. The silence afterward was gentler than I expected. By evening, I made a small meal, nothing elaborate. A salad, some roasted carrots, and leftover chicken I had baked 2 days earlier. I set one place at the small, round table near the window and ate without rushing. The lavender plant caught the fading light, casting a soft shadow across the floor. I wondered what her name was, the woman next door. But I didn't open the door to ask. There was no knock. No footsteps outside. I liked that. After dinner, I opened the drawer beside my chair and pulled out the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable. Thick strokes slightly tilted, the kind Thomas used when signing school forms or writing to the principal to thank her for the choir's new piano. I ran my finger along the edge of the envelope. Not to open it, just to feel something that had once been held with intention. I remembered Reed telling me once that he never liked the lake house. "It's too old," he said, "and the chairs smell like dust." Julia agreed. She offered to rent it out for short-term guests, said it would be a better use of space. I had nodded then. I always nodded. But now there was no one to nod to. I hadn't told them I'd sold the lake house. Quietly. 2 years ago. Thomas had handled the title transfer before he passed. All proceeds went into a fund neither Reed nor Julia had ever asked about. They assumed I lived off my retirement, which wasn't incorrect. It just wasn't the full picture. I looked over at the candle. It had burned low wax, pooling in the curve of the ceramic dish. The dish had once belonged to my mother. She used it for peach pits and bottle caps. I used it for light. The phone buzzed again. A message this time. Dropped off the card. Thanks again. Hope you're well. No name. I deleted it without opening. Later, I took out the old quilt I had sewn when Reed was born. It was thin in the corners, with a fading pattern of blue stars. He never used it after age 6. Said it was too babyish. I kept it anyway. Now it fit across my lap perfectly, just enough warmth without weight. I didn't sleep early. I just sat in the armchair listening to the occasional creak of wood adjusting to the cooling air. A small part of me had always feared silence. Now I welcomed it the way some people welcome routine without celebration, but with certainty. When I finally opened the envelope, the paper inside was smooth folded only once. The ink had not faded. Respect isn't asked for, it's lived. TC. There was no greeting, no sign-off, just that. I folded it again and placed it in the drawer. Not everything needed a reply. They always call when it's cloudy, not stormy, just the kind of overcast that presses against the windows without bothering to knock. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. The name on the screen didn't surprise me. Neither did the voice. Mẹ ơi, con nghe Reed nói, mẹ rút khỏi tài khoản nhà. Nếu có gì không hài lòng, ta có thể ban lại được không ạ? There was a pause, the kind people use when they're not ready to ask what they've come to say. I folded the edge of the receipt I'd just opened. A tiny tear ran across the ink, right through the word groceries. And Reed, she exhaled. He's not well. Since reading that letter from his dad, I didn't answer. The kettle clicked off behind me. I remembered the letter. I'd kept it in the bottom drawer behind a broken photo frame and 2 expired insurance cards. His handwriting was still firm, even near the end. I hadn't expected Reed to find it. I hadn't expected him to read it. But perhaps Thomas knew he would at the right time. He always believed Reed learned backwards, needed to walk the wrong road until it turned to gravel. I had imagined Reed alone in his study, the light from his monitor bouncing off the letter. I could see the way his fingers would have hesitated at the seal, the way his brow would crease as he read, "If you are holding this, it means your mother has been pushed from the picture you now call family. You are successful, Reed, but you are not yet whole. You can't raise children in a home that forgets its roots. You can't be a real husband without learning how a woman should be treated." I imagined him staring at that sentence, and then seeing me not as I had been, but as I'd become. When Julia arrived, I recognized her not by her knock, but by the silence that came after it. She used to walk quickly, heels first. Today I heard nothing. She wore flat shoes, her hair pulled back, no earrings. She didn't smile, just stood at the door and said what I never expected. "I lived in the house you helped us buy, but I kept the door of my heart closed to you. Can you let me try again?" I poured the tea. Jasmine, not her favorite. I pushed the cup toward her without words. "Drink. Then tell me why now." She looked at the cup, then back at me. "Because I saw my husband break in a way I didn't think he could." I waited. She looked down. "He said he didn't recognize himself. He told me he used your card, your trust, and your silence and turned it into absence." I touched the rim of my own cup. It was chipped. Thomas had glued it once, and it held just enough for 1 drink. The crack ran under my finger now. Julia took a small sip, then rested the cup. "You used to come early to Ethan's birthdays. I remember now. You helped hang the banner before anyone else arrived." She didn't meet my eyes. "And I told you to sit." "Let us handle it, Mom," I said. "Then I sent you to the corner couch with a slice of store-bought cake." I didn't blink. Her voice sounded rehearsed, not because it wasn't real, but because it was too late. I thought kindness was something that came after achievement, after a raise, after a new car. But Reed read that letter and she stopped. He said your name like he hadn't said it in years. I let her speak, not because I needed her apology, but because she needed the silence that followed it. I thought if I kept the house clean and sent the right cards, it counted as love. But I kept you out of every photograph. I didn't move. Her tea was still warm. She hadn't touched it again. I understand if you don't believe me, but Reed and I, we know we erased you, not cruelly, just conveniently. I closed my fingers around my own cup. The warmth had settled at the bottom. Reed wanted to come. He couldn't. He said, I don't know what I would say to her. I don't even know what kind of son I've been. I looked down at my lap. The fabric of my pants was worn smooth in one place where my hands had rested too long. Julia took a breath. Could we meet again? Not as before. Just slowly I stood. Not to walk away, just to shift. The kettle clicked again. The lavender on the windowsill had turned toward the dimmest part of the room. I'm not the woman who used to wait by the window. She nodded. I know. I traced the edge of the chipped teacup, the place where Thomas had sealed it. The glue had turned yellow. Your mother once told me, I said, not quite looking at her, a mother's place is the one she makes for herself, not the one she's given. Julia was quiet. I made space for years. She whispered, I never filled it. I set my cup down. I noticed. We didn't talk about forgiveness. We didn't mention birthdays or holidays or shared meals. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single photo. I didn't take it. It's Ethan, from last week. He asked if Grandma was coming to his recital. I looked at the folded towel on the counter where I used to keep my music books. The piano in this house was smaller, quieter, but it still played. Julia stood gently pushing the photo closer. I'll leave it here. I let the silence stretch, not out of pride, not out of punishment, just to let her understand that presence isn't owed, it's noticed. She left a few minutes later. No hug, no promise. I looked down at the chipped cup. Respect, Thomas once wrote, isn't asked for, it's lived. And sometimes it's withdrawn without needing to be explained. I used to think memory faded with silence. But I've learned some things don't disappear just because no one names them. He walked in without the usual click of polished shoes. The bell above the bookstore door chimed like a distant echo, then stopped. I looked up. Reed wasn't in a suit. No briefcase, no tie, just the soft creases of a jacket I hadn't seen since his college days. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he unfolded a piece of paper creased soft around the edges, as if it had lived in his pocket for weeks. I recognized the handwriting even before I saw the signature. It was Thomas's. People always say silence is strength, Reed murmured. But I think I mistook your silence for weakness. I didn't reply. He didn't expect me to. He pulled out another folder and placed it on the counter. No flourish, no explanation. There's no loan attached, no shared name. Everything here belongs to you untouched. I want you to know that nothing you've built will ever be used again without your say. I slid the folder aside. My hand brushed the corner of the countertop where years ago a coffee stain refused to fade. Julia had knocked over her mug when we moved the bookstore shelves. She had laughed loud and careless. I had wiped it up and said nothing. Reed's voice interrupted the silence again. I don't want to take anything else. I just wanted to return what I should have protected. I nodded. He left the letter behind, folded, but open. Later that evening, Julia called, not from her usual Bluetooth echo, but quietly, almost as if afraid someone else might hear. I made dinner. Nothing fancy. Just us. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. But I went. There was no housekeeper, no catered spread. She had set the table herself. Crooked forks, a wrinkled tablecloth. The wine glasses didn't match. Reed was already seated pouring water, not wine. Julia placed a plate in front of me, rosemary chicken, mashed potatoes without skin, just like Thomas liked them. She didn't try to explain the meal or her expression. Instead, she gestured to the chair across from mine. "I want Lily to see this someday," she said. "Not the photos on the wall. This. The effort." She didn't look up when she spoke. Her hands smoothed the napkin beside her own plate. The conversation shifted naturally after that. Ethan asked if I could teach him piano, just the basics, a few chords. He had never asked before. I looked at his fingers. They were longer now, still clumsy, but there was music in the way. He held his breath, waiting for an answer. Lily tugged at my sleeve after dinner. She held out a drawing, stick figures and flowers, a house with 3 stories, and me standing in the center holding a watering can. "That's your peony bush," she whispered. "I told Daddy it was your favorite." I looked down at the page. She had drawn the petals wrong. There were too many layers, too much pink. But somehow she had captured the weight of it. I didn't correct her. That night I sat alone at my writing desk. The ink in Thomas's old pen had nearly dried out. I tested it on the edge of a receipt before I began. The new will didn't mention Reed or Julia by name. Only the grandchildren. The terms were simple. Each would receive a third college fund savings, the rights to the house once I passed. But there was one clause they couldn't touch. It read, "As a condition of inheritance, the peony bush behind the kitchen window must be tended each spring with water, with care, with memory." I sealed the envelope and placed it in the drawer beneath the faded photograph of our first home, Thomas standing on the porch, holding Reed as a baby. My thumb traced the corner where the photo had torn. I didn't need to explain the clause. If they ever came looking, it would be there. The next morning, I stood before the mirror in my bedroom. The light caught the strands of silver in my hair, streaked like rivers. My blouse, once crisp, hung softer now. The cuffs were worn. I buttoned it anyway. For years, I had dressed with others in mind: Sunday dinners, parent-teacher nights, hospital visits. Now it was just for the mirror, just for the rhythm of buttons and cloth. I didn't feel younger. I didn't feel older. But I no longer avoided my own reflection. At the front of the store, Julia had placed a framed photo beside the cash register. A candid shot me standing with Lily and Ethan in the backyard, all of us holding gardening tools, dirt under our nails. Below the frame, a handwritten note read, "We wouldn't be here without her. Anita Calderon, our beginning." It was the first time my full name had been printed on something public in years. I didn't rearrange the frame. I didn't tuck it away. Instead, I turned back to the shelf behind me, pulled out a book I had read long ago, one Thomas had gifted me on our 15th anniversary. A volume of poetry. Emily Dickinson. Between the pages, I found an old receipt, yellowed and curled. On the back, in my own handwriting, a grocery list: lemons, olive oil, candles. I stared at it longer than I should have. Somewhere in that list, in that script, was the woman I had been: efficient, practical, invisible. But I was not that woman now. I placed the book back, not because it no longer mattered, but because it finally did. I no longer feared being forgotten. I simply no longer needed to be remembered on anyone else's terms. I never threw things away. That morning, I simply opened the lowest drawer and began sorting through what I had once labeled unnecessary but not trash. There was no reason, just a quiet sense that it was time. A notebook with faded green bindings slid forward. The edge curled soft with years. Inside it, I found the old family register Thomas had insisted we keep: names, dates, addresses, written in his compact script. There was my name next to his in ink that had slightly bled into the page. Underneath Reed's full name, birthday, hospital, the name of the pediatrician he'd hated. I ran a thumb across the paper, as if the touch could remind me of the days when someone thought my presence was worth recording. Beneath it lay the deed to the house, the same house where my name had once been mentioned only when things broke or bills came due. I unfolded the document and stared at the signature lines, mine in firm strokes, his slightly crooked signed after a night of coffee and late negotiations. I remembered his voice then saying something about dignity. I couldn't recall the full sentence, only that it had ended in the word yours. Further down was a copy of Thomas's letter. Not the original, I had kept that safe. This one was a clean photocopy folded in thirds. I'd made it the same day I opened the envelope, just in case Reed ever misplaced it or denied having seen it. People forget things in different ways. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a new note. Only one sentence. If you ever forget again, read this one more time. I placed it on top of the folder, sealed it in a neutral brown envelope. No return address. Then I reached for the smallest box in my cabinet, the one I hadn't opened in years. It contained nothing of value to the world. Only to me, a photo of Reed at 9 holding a handmade card that read, "I love Mom the most in the world." His teeth were missing in the front. His hair was a mess. I had taken that photo on a Tuesday morning before school after he'd spilled juice on the table and apologized with too many napkins. That photo went into the envelope too. I taped it shut. Hands steady. I mailed it before noon. Later that afternoon, I walked out to the yard and stood before the wooden sign. The one Diane had helped me place weeks ago. For sale. Black letters. Clean lines. Impersonal. I stared at it without touching it for several minutes. The grass had grown around its base. I saw how the soil had swallowed the lower edge, how the screws had rusted from recent rains. There was a time I might have seen that as a sign to move. Now it simply looked like the sign had overstayed its purpose. I reached for the screws with a flathead key I'd kept on my ring. No one was watching. There was no audience, no witness, no photograph. I didn't tell anyone. The sign came off without resistance. I carried it back to the porch and leaned it gently against the bench. I didn't plan to throw it away. I just didn't want it standing in my yard. Not because I'd changed my mind about leaving, but because for the first time this place was no longer contested. It was mine. Quietly, entirely mine. The peony bushes were still in bloom. Julia had asked me weeks ago how to care for them. I hadn't replied, but I noticed she'd stopped clipping the blossoms too early. The petals now held a full shape before falling. Ethan had left a drawing on my doorstep, a house with 3 levels. In the center, a woman holding a watering can, flowers blooming from her feet. I didn't need to ask who she was meant to be. The handwriting in the corner gave it away, Grandma's garden. Inside, I placed the drawing in a plastic sleeve and filed it behind the piano sheet music I kept. The same place I used to hide birthday money notes and things worth remembering. I did not speak of the letter to Reed. I did not ask if he had read the second envelope. I only received a brief message 2 days later. No greeting, no apology. Just, I received the envelope. I understand. I didn't reply. Some silences serve better than words. That evening I made tea in the old blue kettle. The handle still rattled when it got too hot. I let it rattle. Thomas used to say a house becomes a home the moment no one needs to ask for permission to stay. I poured the tea, placed the cup on the tray, beside a single slice of lemon pound cake I had baked that morning. No occasion, just a routine that no longer felt like waiting. In the far corner of the living room, the piano sat closed, untouched. Ethan had not returned for another lesson. Lily had not yet asked for more stories. Julia had not sent another invitation. None of that bothered me, because this time I wasn't waiting. I ran a hand along the piano's wood frame and dusted the keys without lifting the cover. Some instruments aren't meant to be played every day. Some are only meant to remind you they're still there. The sky darkened without warning. I switched on the floor lamp. Its light fell across the room, hitting the picture frame with the photo Reed had drawn as a child me with a crown made of stars. I didn't remember the moment that drawing was made, only the feeling of seeing it for the first time, like being named again. I folded the blanket neatly over the armrest, placed the empty teacup in the sink, and turned the kettle off. I did not speak aloud. There was no need. I had no questions, no expectations, only this quiet. And it was enough. I've come to prefer the quiet of things that don't need explaining. The kettle whistled before the sky turned blue. I didn't rush it. I measured the chamomile with the same silver spoon I've used for years. No sugar, no honey, just warm and plain, like breath after sleep. I poured it into the chipped cup Thomas once brought home from a roadside fair. It has a hairline crack along the rim now, but it doesn't leak. I don't mind it. On Tuesdays and Fridays, I help shelve books at the town library. I like how nobody there calls me anything but ma'am. There's no past attached, no layers to peel. I just place stories where they belong, line after line, binding beside binding. Some books come back dog-eared, some never return. It doesn't bother me. What finds its way home tends to mean more when it's not expected. Lily comes by on Thursdays. She's careful in the kitchen, even when chopping garlic. Last week, she asked if she could use the blue apron with the frayed strings. I let her. She tied it around her waist like it was silk. When the dough stuck to her fingers, she laughed, then looked at me like she needed to know it was okay to laugh here. I didn't speak. I just handed her the flour and watched the way she stood straighter afterward. Ethan found one of Thomas's old piano books and took it without asking. I saw it tucked under his arm when they left last Sunday. He doesn't play perfectly. His fingers stall in places, skip others. But the house doesn't flinch at his clumsy notes. The melody is enough. Julia texts each Sunday evening. She never writes paragraphs, just a few words that land like folded laundry. We're thinking of you. The kids miss your voice. I don't expect forgiveness. I'll just wait. I never reply immediately. Sometimes I don't reply at all. But I read every message more than once, not because I'm waiting for the right one, just because she's still trying. Quiet effort counts more than loud regret. This morning, I trimmed the lavender out front. The old growth had turned brittle. I placed the cut stems in a brown paper bag and tied it shut with string from the drawer. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. Maybe give it to the neighbor who leaves me lemons on the porch. Lily was on the steps with her sketchpad legs crossed, like she'd seen grown-ups do. "Grandma," she said without looking up, "can I write about you for my school essay? It's about someone who inspires me." I sat beside her, brushed away a petal that had fallen into her hair. "If you want. But don't do it because you feel sorry for me. Do it because you see me clearly." She nodded, drawing lines that barely touched the paper. Inside, I opened the lowest drawer of the tea cabinet. I keep a few things there not because they're valuable, but because they remind me I was here. A pressed maple leaf from last fall. The stub of a pencil Reed once chewed. A photograph folded at the corners between Thomas and Reed, taken before the weight of years made us smaller. I added one more item today, a copy of Thomas's letter. I didn't read it again. I'd memorized the tone long ago, even if the words still shift with the years. I folded it, tucked it under the photo, and closed the lid of the wooden box. Some days I think about moving. not out of restlessness, but as a form of gentle beginning. Other times I let the thought pass like wind that brushes the curtains but never knocks them down. There was once a version of me that waited to be needed, waited to be thanked, waited to be invited in. She folded napkins perfectly and bought gifts with hidden meaning. She took silence as a signal to try harder. I don't fold napkins anymore. I just wipe the table clean and leave the cloth hanging over the oven rail. This version of me doesn't search for a place in the photograph. If I'm there, I'm there. If not, I still ate the meal, still washed the dishes, still closed the lights when everyone went to bed. They don't need to say my name for me to exist in the room. I passed the mirror in the hallway and paused. My hair has grayed at the edges softer than it used to be. I smoothed it back without fuss. My face doesn't look younger, but it no longer waits for permission to smile. I carry myself differently, not with pride or defiance, just certainty. I don't belong to them the way I used to. And that's not loss, it's arrival. There's a comfort in knowing I could leave again and not vanish. That I could be silent and still matter. That I could pour tea for myself, and it wouldn't be a substitute, it would be the whole ceremony. So many years I tried to anchor myself in other people's recognition, in their titles for me. Mother, wife, provider, guest. I wore those names like coats I thought I couldn't take off. Now I open the door in the morning and step out as only one thing here. I don't require a seat at the table. I don't need my name on the invitation. I don't check who else has been credited. The lavender still blooms whether or not I clip it. The kettle still whistles without applause. The light on the porch still turns on at dusk, not because it waits for me, but because that's what it does. I know I have lived well because I no longer have to prove I've lived at all.